Broadcasting from the world headquarters of the National Floor Safety Institute is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzie.
This is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzior. Thanking you again for listening to my podcast. And welcome to Season 2. This season's going to be a little bit different than Season 1 in that it is going to combine two broadcasts. The first, of course, is that of Slip and Fall Guy, which is everything related to slips, trips, and falls, where I interview industry leaders, product manufacturers, researchers, occasionally a celebrity, as well as a growing number of international listeners. The Slip and Fall Guy podcast has been a huge success. We have listeners across the world, and we'll be incorporating some of them into the program as well. So thanks for listening. The second broadcast is going to be that of my recently launched radio show entitled Safety Matters, which debuted on July the 18th here in Dallas-Fort Worth on Talk Radio, AM 660 The Answer, KSKY, which is part of the Salem Media Group. And that program is going to be talking about all matters of safety, not just slips, trips, and falls, but the types of stories that you hear, read about in the paper, listen to on the media. And we're going to address a lot of issues that you face each and every day, the risks that you encounter each and every day related to safety. So welcome you to that program, and it will be posted every Monday on the program. And if you'd like to listen to it, again, it's on AM 660, The Answer, on Saturday mornings at 7 o'clock Central Time. You can actually stream it from the AM 660 website, or just wait a couple of days and you can listen to it here on the podcast. So if you have any questions, like to suggest a topic, love to hear from you. You can reach me at my Twitter feed, which is @TractionExpert, or send me an email, russ@thesafetymattersshow.com. So with that, welcome to Season 2, and thanks again for all your support.
Each year, more than 46 million Americans will seek emergency room treatment for an accidental injury, most of which are preventable. So, what are your risks, and who can you trust to protect you? This is Safety Matters with Russ Kenzior.
This is America's Slip and Fall Guy, Russ Kenzior. Thanks for listening to Safety Matters. Joining me today is my producer, Tony B. He will be working the board, and you'll be hearing that very lovely voice throughout the course of today's program. But the program is all about safety and how it impacts you and your family. If you're tracking the news, which many of you probably are, you cannot help but get away from hearing stories on the coronavirus, whatever the safety threat is of the day. Coronavirus is a big deal today, and we're going to be talking about that later on in the program. But you hear a lot of data, you hear a lot of information that can really be scary. And most people don't really understand what the data means. In fact, how often do we hear from our government that the decisions being made by our state, by other states, by the federal government is based on science and data? Well, we never really get to see the science or data. We just get interpretations of the science and data, and it can be very, very confusing. Things like, gee, should I be wearing a mask? Does a mask really work? Does washing my hands, do what they're telling me it does in terms of keeping me safe? Does, social distancing, does that really work? Now, we're being told all those things work, but at the same time, this pandemic is just going through the roof. So how could it be, Tony, that we are doing everything right to the best of our ability? We shut down the country for 3 months. In fact, we're still shut down, but yet this virus is rising. Well, part of the problem is that the information we're getting is a bit biased. And that doesn't mean that the coronavirus is not a scare. It's not, I'm not saying it's a hoax, because it's not a hoax. It's a very serious problem. But we got to put it in context. And that's what the show's about. The show's about taking matters of safety and putting it into context. so you can protect yourself and your family. See, at the end of the day, you just don't know who to trust. You don't know whose numbers are valid. You hear one day, social distancing is really, really important. Then you're going to get a report from the World Health Organization saying, well, no, even with social distancing, you can still get the virus. You'll hear one day the importance of wearing masks, and then the next day, oh, no, it really doesn't matter. And then they flip-flop again. Well, it does matter. And so everybody is confused and everybody is scared. And I want to make your life a little bit easier, help you protect yourself and your family to the best of your ability, not just for coronavirus, but every aspect of your life, because you are far more likely going to be the victim of a slip and fall than you are a victim of coronavirus. In fact, your chances as a Texan of contracting coronavirus, at least based on today's data, is about 1 in 10,000. Well, what do you think the risk of a slip and fall is, Tony? What do you think the risk of somebody slipping and falling is?
1 out of 4.
1 out of 127.
Ooh.
You guessed high, but not that high. Your chances of dying as a result of a fall are significantly greater than your chances of contracting, let alone dying from coronavirus. But most people would never believe that. They think coronavirus is everywhere. They're taking safeguards everywhere they go. What are you doing to prevent yourself from being a victim of a slip and fall? And remember, I'm speaking as the slip and fall guy. This is my background. But the data is what the data is. We don't oftentimes get access to it, but we have to make decisions for ourselves. And that's what the show's about. What you can do to make your life as safe as you can make it based on the information that you have. And, data is important. But at the end of the day, you got to make decisions. Look, just getting in your car and driving to work, driving to the supermarket, there's risk. There's risk in everything we do. Drinking tap water, there's a risk. Eating, food that has high fat contents, that's a risk. Everything we do in our life is a matter of risk. And so we're going to be talking about defining terms. We're going to talk about what is the term, for example, average. Well, the average person. Well, what is the average person? Who's the average person? Or what is, percentages? Most people, when they were in school, dreaded one subject more than anything. Science. Well, math. There you go. I was a math major. But most people do not like math. They didn't like studying math, and they're math deficient. And so therein lies also a bit of the problem, because as we hear mathematical numbers, data, being presented to us by the media, by our government, by so-called experts, we oftentimes misinterpret the meaning of the numbers because we're not very good as a society with numbers. We're a society committed to science. We're really, really big on science. So everything we hear is, well, the decisions being made for your benefit, for your safety, is based on science, is based on data.
Whose science?
Whose science? Whose data? Where did it come from? How was the scientific studies done? For example, when the coronavirus was first identified, we were told by the mathematical models coming out of the World Health Organization that there would be over 2 million Americans dying as a result of the coronavirus. That was the scare. That's why we shut the government down.
Shut the whole country down.
Shut the country down because we were afraid that we were going to lose 2 million people. Well, that model proved to be false. In fact, the following 2 or 3 models were false. And it wasn't intentional. I'm not suggesting that scientists are lying to us. They plug in bad data. And when you plug in bad data, when I say bad data, data that was based on estimates. Theories, a hypothesis, an assumption. Maybe data that was somehow related to a previous bout of the flu, of an influenza. But nonetheless, the data that went in was flawed. It was incorrect, and it produced bad output. And that bad output led to bad decision-making. One can argue otherwise, but in my view, it leads to poor decision-making. And here we are. We're now living with the consequences of flawed models, data that was suspicious. And, what do you do? What do you do? So we're going to cover that. We're going to cover a lot of topics today. Coronavirus is one of them. We're going to be talking about how safety matters to you in your life, in your family, because every single one of us has the desire to have a long and healthy life, to be prosperous, to be able to, enjoy the time we have because, well, you never know how long you got. So with that, we're going to also be talking about fear and how people are just afraid oftentimes when they hear the news. In fact, watching the news is all about fear, getting you scared. What is going to happen today to you if you don't do something? What are the consequences? For example, we've been hearing a lot about the flattening of the curve. When Dr. Fauci and the coronavirus task group first became kind of a daily presence on all the news channels, what we were told is that there was this spiking curve, the bell-shaped curve, what's called the normal distribution curve. And if we didn't do anything, that curve was just going to spike so high that all the hospital rooms in the country, all the hospital beds would be flooded with people. You remember that, Tony?
Yeah, there'd be there's no vacancy.
Right. So we would have this inundation overload of the hospital system, and we got pretty close to that in New York City. I mean, a lot of people got really, really sick. They flooded into the hospitals, and it really became overwhelming in the state of New York and the city of New York. But the decision was made to flatten the curve. Now, what you need to understand is when you say flattening the curve, all that means is we don't have as many people getting sick at the same time. But the area under that curve, you know what I'm talking about, Tony? That's area right. Under the curve is the same.
Yes.
There's going to be just as many people getting sick. We're just going to stretch it out. It's going to go on. And that's what we see today. Here we are in July, and there's still people getting sick. And they will continue to get sick because the flattening of the curve just means we stretch the problem out.
But we're also testing more.
And so that also is affecting the results, the positivity results, the numbers. And so where we find ourselves is in this predicament of when is this going to be over?
Right.
And we don't really know when it's going to be over. Now, the other reason for flattening the curve, which is also a good reason, is if we can slow down the rate of growth, that'll kind of be truncated if we can develop an antivirus remedy, if we can actually have a vaccine. So if we can create a vaccine fast enough, there's going to be a lot of people that will not get the coronavirus. But here we are in July seeing just high numbers of people being exposed. Now, just because you tested positive doesn't mean you're going to die. In fact, it doesn't mean you're even going to get sick.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Russ Kenzier, Safety Matters. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Safety Matters. This is Russ Kenzier, and we were talking a little bit about the coronavirus. Okay, so with that, you're probably asking yourself, who is this guy, Russ Kenzier? It sounds like a safety guy. He's not a doctor. He's not an epidemiologist. He's not a medical professional. And the answer is correct, and I'm proud of that. You don't need to be a medical doctor to understand safety and risk. In fact, that's part of the problem, in my view, is there's not enough safety people providing advice to our decision makers. Our decision makers are taking advice from medical experts, which really, sadly, have been wrong a lot. And so let's boil it down, okay? Let's boil it down. Let's make it simple. What can we do? It's not the end of the world. You're not going to die. At least chances are you're not going to die unless you're in a high-risk age group. You have a certain medical conditions that would provide for you to be at risk. And if you are at risk, protect yourself, period. But everybody else shouldn't be locked down if they're low risk. And again, that's a safety risk management approach. You don't need to be a medical doctor because that philosophy applies to everything. Those theories of safety, okay, apply to all areas of one's life. And so I'm kind of getting tired of being blamed for this. The government's constantly lecturing about wear your masks and you're not doing enough to prevent the coronavirus. And, you read the data, as I have done in preparing for this segment, about masks. Let's just talk a little bit about masks. And again, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm a safety guy. I built my career dating back to the 1990s when I started a company called Traction Plus. It was a company that I invented and developed a line of slip and fall prevention products, which is why they call me the slip and fall guy, because that's what I've done. I've spent my entire career creating products to prevent injuries for people just like you. And my product line has been sold all across the world. And from there, I expanded into the National Floor Safety Institute, which, in fact,
NFSI.
NFSI, we're in their studios today, recording the program in the NFSI studio. So I have a lot of background in safety, slip and fall prevention, but safety is safety. And I'm very proud to be a safety person. But you don't need to be a medical doctor to understand risk. Okay, and one of the things that I think has been very troubling is we are depending on medical experts to lead policy decisions from our political leaders, and oftentimes they're just not good. The policies,
they're getting it wrong.
They're getting it wrong. They're getting it wrong. Let's go back to masks. The importance of wearing a mask. Remember, the Centers for Disease Control gave us 3 rules. Social distancing, 6 feet or more. Not certain if that works. Not certain if that works.
No science.
We haven't seen the science. Now, the World Health Organization, and again, it's almost like there's this tug of war between the United States and the World Health Organization. Who's telling the truth? They both revise their opinions so often you can't keep up with it. And by the way, their opinions are almost always scary. The end result is always fear, to generate fear. So we talk about social distancing, 6 feet or more. Does that work? Well, we presume it does. The coronavirus is a very, very small organism. We're talking about 3 micrometers in size. So if you're wearing a face mask, a conventional face mask, an N95 type face mask, they can filter up to 95% of anything, pretty much, assuming you're wearing it properly, it's properly fitted, and you're not touching it, you're not contaminating it. Well, most people are not wearing N95 masks. Why? Because you can't find them. They're not selling them. They sold out. So we're wearing all different types of masks, many of which are cloth masks. Now, if you note, and if you've been paying attention, the Centers for Disease Control don't require wearing face masks. They require what, Tony?
I don't know. They wear a sock.
Face covers, right?
Yes.
Cover your face. Well, that's like taking your T-shirt and putting it up over your nose and mouth. I mean, I know that sounds comical, but it's really about the same thing. The amount of filtration that a cloth mask can provide is even less that, obviously less that than an N95 mask. It's most likely going to be contaminated. And the purpose of wearing face covers and masks is to prevent spreading the virus. Now, if you're at a grocery store and you're wearing a face mask or a face cover and everybody else is, the likelihood that you're going to be spreading the coronavirus between one person and another is greatly unknown. Why? Because the virus is very, very small. And you don't have to cough. Now, I'm going to ask the question of you, Tony, because you shop a lot. Have you been out and there's people walking around coughing?
No, I haven't seen anybody.
I mean,
cough.
people are. I'm walking around, shopping, and I'm not seeing a lot of people coughing.
I see them trying to breathe.
Yeah, they're trying to breathe through the doggone mask. And so the mask is to prevent coughing. Well, there's a lot of people that are shopping that are obviously not coughing. They're at home and they're doing the right thing. If you're not feeling good, you're coughing, you stay at home. And that's generally been followed.
I think everybody follows that
People
rule.
kind of get it. All right. Yeah. Again, you walk around, you see people wearing their masks, all different types of face covers. We're doing the best we can. We're social distancing, but this virus is very, very contagious. And like all previous viruses that have plagued the world as far as pandemics, they don't go away. They're very, very stubborn. They morph into different forms and they become very hard to control. And now here we are. Millions of people across the world have been infected. Millions of Americans have been infected. And so the cat's kind of out of the bag. So what do? Do you wear a mask? You don't wear a mask. Well, let's assume the following. Wearing a mask will help. We don't know how much, but it will help. And if you wear a mask versus a face cover, it will help more. And so look at it as you're adding water to the glass. You want to fill the glass up. Well, if you want to prevent getting sick, fill the glass up beginning with the mask. Wear masks because if that can provide 30 to 40% protection, that's good. That's a good thing. The second area is really dealing with cleanliness, washing your hands. In fact, today I just saw a story where the federal government, the CDC, has recalled 65 different hand sanitizing companies' products because they contain methanol. Well, methanol is what they use to make liquor. In fact, if you didn't know this, Tony, there's a lot of companies that were making alcohol.
Switching over.
They're switching over to making hand sanitizer, and the first stage of alcohol production is methanol. And so they're making methanol hand cleaners, which can be harmful. Methanol, if you get it on your hands, you expose your body to it, you can actually be doing more harm to you. So follow the bouncing ball. You're using a methanol hand cleaner to prevent transmission of the coronavirus, but what you're really doing is potentially exposing yourself to a greater risk to the hand sanitizer, to methanol, right?
Right.
But you don't know it. So you're washing your hands, you're doing everything right, and lo and behold, it didn't work. But washing your hands with soap and water is probably the most effective way to go because it breaks the actual outer membrane of the coronavirus to destroy it. It actually kills the coronavirus. Now, a lot of buildings, I mean, every time I go to a restaurant, they're just cleaning everything. There's a difference between cleaning and disinfecting. In fact, if you go to the Centers for Disease Control website, they have an entire list of approved disinfectants. If you apply any of the Centers for Disease Control disinfectants to a hard surface, like a countertop or anything that you want to disinfect, you have to leave it on, Tony, for a minimum of
5 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes. I mean, it takes a long time. It's not just wiping the surface and boom, it's sanitized.
You actually have to sometimes leave a film on it.
Right. You have to allow the active ingredient to work to kill the virus. Otherwise, if you just wipe it on and you
dry it off,
it doesn't work. You lose the efficiency, the efficacy of the product that goes down. And so wear the mask, okay? Wash your hands. Use an alcohol-based sanitizer. You're filling the glass up. Now let's say you're about 65% of the way there to protecting yourself. Well, what else can you do? Social distance. But how much of that can you really do? Not a lot. I mean, you can only social distance so much. You know, they actually said that a lot of the virus is spread through the air internally and inside of a building. So one thing that you may want to consider is your filtration system in your home or your business, your office. Are your air ducts clean? Is the filters in your furnace, your return air exchange, are they clean? When's the last time you replaced them? They actually make filters that are very, very effective at filtering out certain types of bacteria and fungus and viruses. One that my family put in our house when we first built it is ultraviolet light. I don't know if you've ever seen these, Tony.
That's the best.
Yeah, you put a UV light.
Because even a HEPA filter doesn't take it out.
HEPA filters can actually do more harm than good because they get clogged up pretty quickly. And now you restrict airflow, which is not good for your ventilation system or you. But if you put in a UV lighted system in the air exchange in your furnace, that's going to kill and destroy bacteria, fungus, spores, etc. It's very, very effective. And that's something you could do today. Again, you're filling that glass. You're doing as much as you can to minimize exposure, to minimize risk of contracting the coronavirus. What else can you do? You want to stay healthy. Take care of yourself.
Eat right.
Eat right. Get enough sleep. If you have any vitamin deficiencies, vitamin D, vitamin C, there's a lot of evidence that shows that they're helpful in building up your immune system. A stronger immune system means your body has a stronger ability to fight anything, including viruses. So really, really important to keep yourself strong, keep your body in good shape, exercise, work out, wonderful ways you can do that without even having to leave your house. But one thing I want to leave you with before the next segment is have a positive attitude. You can worry yourself sick. There are people I know that have not left their house, Tony, since February. And members of the family who never left got sick. It's amazing. You can literally worry yourself to becoming sick because as people worry, their immune system drops and they become more vulnerable to anything. And so just maintain a good attitude. Look, it's not the end of the world. We are not dealing with the plague. We're dealing with a very serious pandemic. It's one that we should not underestimate, but it's certainly one that with corrective steps can be really well managed. And you can remain safe. You can reduce the risk. And even if you get the coronavirus, which God forbid you do, we have a 99% in the state of Texas recovery rate. So we know how to manage it well. Now, nobody wants to get sick. Nobody wants to be there. But in the event you do, and we want to minimize the likelihood, there's still a lot of hope. And don't walk around being worried all day because you're going to worry yourself sick.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Russ Kenzier, Safety Matters. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Safety Matters. some of the debate that is taking place throughout our country right now regarding coronavirus is political. Some of it is scientific, and some of it's a combination of both. We're hearing a lot of information coming out of the mouth of politicians based on science, and we're hearing scientists who are really taking more of a political position. And it kind of merges science with politics, and that's the most deadly combination you can get because we really don't know what the truth is. We hear things like science. We have the data to support our position. Well, let's take a step back and define some terms. In fact, Tony, we're going to put this on the website or the Twitter feed, is just defining some basic terms. We haven't been in school, most of us were, well, in my case, probably 25 years. And so let's do a little refresher.
Yeah, because there's a lot of terminology that they use and big words, but what are the definitions of those words?
Well, for example, let's start with science. Science is based on what's called the scientific method. Remember that term?
Yes.
The scientific method is actually very, very simple. It starts with this basic concept or observation of a problem. So the scientist, the researcher will then understand the problem, create a hypothesis, and we're going to talk about the definition of that term, and then they prove whether or not the hypothesis is true or false. Now, any other scientist can duplicate the scientific method.
And verify it.
Correct. That's what science is all about. Somebody had an idea, they came up with a hypothesis as to why it was happening, for example, transmission of coronavirus. They then proved the hypothesis scientifically through a methodology of examination of testing, research, and then the hypothesis is even proven true or false. Now, here's the problem. Rarely does anything prove to be 100% one way or the other.
We found that out.
We have a range of data that can show levels of effectiveness all over the board. And so what happens is the data is then interpreted by a scientist and produced as an opinion. And I know a lot about that because I spend a lot of my time as an expert witness. In fact, I've been retained on over 800 lawsuits across the country, and that's what I'm paid for, is to take information, take facts, take evidence, apply the standards that are appropriate for that particular matter, apply the scientific method, and then come up with a conclusion. Now, that conclusion is my opinion. That's what I do. I render opinions. Well, that's what medical doctors do. Remember, medical doctors, Tony, practice medicine. They're not infallible. They make mistakes. They're doing the best they can based on the evidence they have, based on the knowledge they have. So when we hear the term science, well, it's based on the scientific method, the scientific principle of how you come about learning about your environment. And again, we've been talking about the coronavirus. But, I use the term hypothesis or theory. Well, hypothesis is just a supposition. It's a proposal. It's an explanation made on the basis of, again, limited information, but it's a starting point for an investigation. It's where you begin. You create a hypothesis. And so what we find is in the field of science, the hypothesis is created, there's some evaluation, and then there's a conclusion that becomes interpreted as an opinion. And that's what we hear. So when we hear the science, understand the science is oftentimes just somebody's opinion of what they learned. Speculation. Another term widely used. If you speculate, well, a lot of speculation going on these days. That's the forming of a theory or conjecture without any firm evidence. Okay, so you don't really have any data. You just speculate. You fill in the blanks. So when the World Health Organization says 6 feet is not enough for coronavirus, we need to be 10 feet. Now, aside from the fact that it's impractical, where does that come from? Well, oftentimes that's speculation based on some limited study that was done somewhere on the planet by somebody that showed the coronavirus can actually go further than 6 feet. And again, that's based on certain conditions, temperature, how hard the person's coughing.
Inside or outside.
Inside or outside. So again, it's data, but it's based on speculation. Now, we hear the term anecdotal data. Okay, anecdotal. Well, what does anecdotal mean? And again, this is a refresher course.
It's like the dodo bird.
It's not necessarily true or reliable. Anecdotal data is again based on personal accounts, personal opinions, rather than facts or research. Certain things kind of make sense. And so you say, well, okay, based on the fact that it just makes sense, it's reasonable to have a face cover over your mouth if you're breathing or coughing. That it seems like to make a lot of sense. Well, when you take a closer examination, if you were to just take a regular cloth, a cotton material, Tony, put it across your face and cough, a lot of it's going to go right through the material because the coronavirus is now being propelled and it's very, very small.
Microscopic.
Very tiny. And so some of that will get through. But it, again, gives this false sense of security. And when we hear wear a face cover versus wear a mask, and we're not defining mask, there's a certain amount of that evidence that just has yet to be proven. Yes, it's anecdotal evidence. It makes sense wearing a face cover would really be good to do, but we're not really certain how good. We don't know, Tony, if the lockdown worked. We don't know. We don't know that if we just would have kind of let this thing blow and go and a lot of people would have got sick at the beginning. And remember, our country invested millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars in outfitting here in Dallas. The K. Bailey Hutchinson Convention Center was converted to a hospital. And so there was an anticipation that there's going to be this huge surge of people getting sick, and not just sick, but dying, going to be hospitalized, needing to be on a ventilator. So there's a counter theory, speculation, that says had the herd immunity approach been taken, meaning don't lock down the country, just kind of let this thing go, it'll burn itself out because the coronavirus will eventually run out of hosts and it'll die. That's another theory. We never tested that theory because we took the approach of flattening the curve and reducing the number of, or limiting the number of exposures as to protect the hospital system. That was a decision. That decision had consequences. The consequences to that decision, ladies and gentlemen, is what you are living today. That's what we're living today, the consequences of that decision. I am not questioning whether that was a good or bad decision, but that's where we are today. So when you hear, well, you've saved millions of lives by locking down the country, we really don't know how true that is. Maybe it would make sense. There's some anecdotal evidence to suggest that did, in fact, make a big difference, and it certainly did for the high-risk community. Look, locking down, if you want to use that term, and that's a strong term, those who are the most vulnerable makes perfect sense. If you are high risk, you're over the age of 70, you have high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, all the conditions that when combined with coronavirus is deadly. Those are the folks that really, really need to be focused on. But while we were trying to protect them, we locked everybody else down.
Right.
It's kind of like if you want to prevent crime, let's just lock everybody down and not just the criminals. Well, okay, I guess that would work, but I'm not so certain how many people would like being locked down for not breaking the law. But these terms have meaning. And the last term I want to throw around is the term average. You hear the term, well, the average age or the average victim or the average, death rate.
Median.
There's another one, median. Well, average is just an expression of a central data point. It's the kind of a typical value. You have a set of data. You have a series of numbers in a particular mode or median, which is oftentimes called the mean. But all you're doing is you're dividing the sum of the values into their set. So you're really just taking numbers and you're dividing them into each other to create an average value. The median is another form of average. And so when you hear the term median, like median home value, that's a real popular term in real estate. The median home value, well, it's just another form of expressing an average. It's usually just representing a middle number. And so 50% of the homes have a value above the median, and then the other 50% have a value below the median. That's what median means. Okay, so when you put all this together into a theory, and that's another term we need to talk about before the break, that's just a supposition, a system of ideas intended to explain something. So if you have a theory of something, it's just that. It's an idea that you have that needs to be explored, through the scientific method, as we talked about earlier, and that's the science in a nutshell. And again, a lot of these terms that I'm covering today are terms you hear all the time when it comes to safety. We hear numbers. We hear terms like average, median. We hear a lot about theories and hypotheses, I should say, speculations. And so to lay the groundwork for really understanding your health and safety, we need to understand the numbers, where they come from, how they're calculated, who's calculating them, and whose opinions are we really hearing from. Because there's an old saying, Tony, liars figure and figures lie. Anybody can make anything out to be really, really good or really, really bad. That's just the nature, that's human nature. So if you're a business person and you're trying to sell your company, boy, you're going to put the best light on it you can. Oh, we've had an increase of customers by 700%. Well, that took it from one person to 7 people or 8 people. Okay, so you can sugarcoat anything you want, and you can use numbers against a person, or you can really make things out to be really, really bad, when in fact you're not that bad at all. It's how you manage and organize the numbers and how you understand numbers as a form of risk as it applies to you. It applies to you in your life. And so when we come back, we're going to talk about what's the riskiest part of your life. Is going to a bar more riskier than opening your mail? We'll be talking about that when you come back.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Russ Kenzier, Safety Matters. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Safety Matters. We were talking about and are talking about the coronavirus and some of the data, some of the information that's going into the pool. And I learned a long time ago that most people have a hard time understanding scale. So if you talk about something very, very small like a virus, most people have a hard time understanding the size of an atom, for example. And the same is true for the opposite side of the scale. The distance of a light year is really, really difficult. That's why scientists have such a difficult time coming up with their theories and developing science.
Explaining themselves.
You can't really see it. It's very difficult. So we're going to make it more practical. In the state of Texas, we've had a wide range of testing going on for coronavirus. In fact, we've had over 2 million people in the state of Texas tested for the coronavirus. And if you want to kind of compare that in terms of size, that would be equivalent to the city of Houston. Everybody in the city of Houston got tested for the coronavirus.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of people.
Yes.
Of that number, 10,405 people have been hospitalized. And so there's a lot of people getting hospitalized. There's been a lot of new cases, kind of a high rate of growth. But how many of them, of those 2 million plus people who've been tested, actually tested positive? Well, the answer is just over 250,000. And so that would be equivalent to the city of Plano. So imagine, if you would, that everyone in the city of Houston got tested and everyone in the city of Plano, in terms of size, scale, tested positive. To kind of give you some numbers. Well, of all of those people, we had a total so far of just over 3,000 people, 3,235 Texans have died from the coronavirus, and that would be equivalent to the town of Laguna Vista. Laguna Vista town down by
South Texas.
Yeah, down there by Padre. So everyone in Houston got tested, everybody in Plano tested positive, and everyone in Laguna Vista, which is a very, very small community. In fact, it's really an extremely small community. So the scale of understanding the risk that you have of either contracting the virus, let alone needing hospitalization or dying, it kind of gives you an understanding that it's very unlikely. In fact, the likelihood of contracting the coronavirus and dying from it is 0.01%. So it would be 1 out of 10,000. 1 out of 10,000 people. That's your risk. That's where you are. So give it a little scale. But let's talk more about risk. And there was a story put out a couple weeks ago by TexMed.org, TexMed.org, which is Texas Medicine Detail Organization. They put out a little interesting press release, and it was entitled, "What's More Risky, Going to a Bar or Opening the Mail?" It was put out by a gentleman by the name of David Doolittle. And so let me ask you, Tony, as a quiz, what's more risky? Spending an hour at a playground or grocery shopping? You think playground?
Nah.
Well, grocery shopping on the COVID-19 risk form that's been produced, and it's really an interesting form, has a risk factor of 3. So on a scale of 1 to 9, the doctors rate grocery shopping as a 3. Okay? What do you think going to the playground is?
A 1.
Spending an hour at a playground is a 4.
Ooh, I told you I was right.
Yeah, so you would actually be presenting yourself in a little bit more riskier situation at the playground than you would at the grocery store. Now, I don't know how many people, kind of get that or believe it. But nonetheless, that's question number 2. How about going to the beach or going camping? Which is more risky, going to the beach or going camping?
Well, if you listen to the media, I think it would say going to the beach.
Well, going to the beach has a health risk of 5.
50-50.
Yeah, going camping is a 2. Now, I don't quite get that. Unless you're going camping by yourself and there's really nobody with you. Yeah. I mean, if you're by yourself, then you're by yourself. Where you go to the beach, there certainly will be other people on the beach. But that's the scale. That's the risk. How about working a week in an office building or staying 2 nights in a hotel? What do you think is riskier?
Office building.
Office building, huh? Well, staying in a hotel 2 nights has a health risk of a 4, where working in an office building has a health risk of a 5. Not certain where these numbers come from.
So how did they get these numbers?
Not certain.
Is there any science behind it?
Well, they claim there is, but it's, again, unclear, and these are opinions at the end of the day. I mean, it's interesting. Last question. Going to a hair salon, boy, we hear about that, right? Getting your hair cut. I mean, you'd swear that is just certain death. Or visiting a library or museum. What's riskier, getting your hair cut or going to a library and museum?
I got this one. The museum.
Really? Well, going to a museum has a health risk of 4, and going to a salon or barber shop is a 7.
Ooh, they really got it down.
Not certain where they come up with that, but the bottom scale, opening your mail has a health risk of 1, and going to a bar has a health risk of 9. So they're on opposite ends of the scale. Now, what I find interesting is just by locking yourself down, having 0 exposure to any human being on the planet, not going out to eat, not exposing yourself, to any risk, but simply checking or opening your mail. I guess that would apply to opening a Amazon box. You can still get the coronavirus.
1.
I mean, I that kind of blew me away. And of course, going to the bar, that's a social environment. People are laughing and atomizing a lot of their breath. And so I could understand that number being a little bit higher, a lot higher. But that's the risk scale. Yes, you asked a really good question. Where do these numbers come from? Okay, who number crunched this? And there's a study that they use as a guide. It's another term, guide. Again, this was produced by the Texas Medical Association. They have a COVID-19 task force and a committee on infectious disease that created this chart. And
opinions.
So ultimately it's opinions. I just caution everyone that, not everything you read is necessarily, what you think it is. For example, they have playing baseball or playing football rated the same, even though they're very, very different sports. I mean, football is much more contact-oriented. You're literally next to people, and you're breathing very heavy on them. But say you're a pitcher in baseball or an outfield. Not certain. Again, not certain. Traveling by plane. What do you think traveling by plane is? What would be the health risk? You think it would be higher than attending a funeral or wedding?
Probably.
Actually, they're the same.
Wow.
Not certain where that came from. Did I say that before?
No. It's an opinion.
And so people die of coronavirus, and the health risk of going to their funeral is significant. Now, I'm not certain, because you know what? You got to weigh the balance here. And, God forbid somebody in your family died and you want to go to their funeral. There's a trauma, there's a cost of not attending their funeral that you got to weigh into the equation. Would you not go to a close family member, close friends, funeral because you're afraid of coronavirus? I mean, you miss something by not attending their funeral. And that's the flip side of this whole story. And that's really where we're going to wrap up today's show. No matter what you think of coronavirus, no matter who you believe, no matter what data is out there, take it with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, no matter what you do, there's consequences. By risking potentially getting coronavirus, you're trading off living. And that's time you're never going to get back. And so you have to weigh it. And I think the biggest, most heavy burden is people who are forced with not having the ability to open their business. They can't work. They can't create income. They can't pay their bills because their business, their company is shut down. And so as you've made the decision, or the decision has been made for you by government, that your business is going to be shut down because you're non-essential, which, by the way, is an offensive term. I think everybody's essential. But because your business has been deemed non-essential, you now have found yourself in a situation where everything you've worked for, your entire livelihood, your future, sending your kids to college, just paying your bills, having some retirement is put into jeopardy. And what we've been led to believe is that it's worth the chance, it's worth the risk, it's worth doing that because there's a greater good, and that greater good is protecting people from the coronavirus. And here in Texas, we're a bit different. Folks think differently than the rest of the country. And in that, it's let me make the decision for myself whether I'm willing to risk my life, my potential health, my life potential health consequences of my life, for that of my livelihood, for that of my existence. Because you know what? Congratulations. You might not get the coronavirus, but you're no longer in business. You're now bankrupt. And that's a tough call for a lot of people. It's not an easy call, but it's a personal call. But here we are, decisions being made, hopefully in the best interest of everybody. We all want this to go away. We want the numbers to go down. And by golly, safety matters. People's safety matters. Next week, we're going to cover a diverse subject matter of risk, risk in general. What is the risk of you contracting cancer? What is the risk of you dying from a heart attack? What is the risk of you getting bit by a bee and dying? What are your chances of being seriously injured on your job based on your industry, based on your profession? Everything we do from the moment we get up to the moment we go to sleep. And by the way, while we're sleeping, there's risk. I'm Russ Kenzior, and this is Safety Matters. I hope you enjoyed today's show and would love to hear from you. If you have a question that you'd like me to answer or would like to suggest a show topic, you can email me at russ@thesafetymattersshow.com. My Slip and Fall Guide podcast is available on either Apple or Google Podcasts. And if you'd like to learn more about my work as an expert witness or purchase one of my books, please visit my website at tractionexperts.com. Until then, have a safe day.